Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're constantly trying to decode someone's silence you care deeply? You try harder. You send the right texts, say the right words, give them space when they need it, and still nothing. They pull away. They hurt you, and worst of all, they never apologize. But here's the truth: if someone is avoidant, they're not wired to fix things through confrontation. They're wired to run, delay, distract, not to repair. So waiting for them to come around and finally say, "I'm sorry I hurt you," will leave you exhausted. But here's the good news. You can get that apology. You can get them to take accountability. You just have to stop chasing it the way you think you should. Here's what you do instead. You create space, but not the passive, maybe they'll miss me, kind. I mean active, empowered space. You pull your energy back, not to punish them, but to protect you. You say, without anger, without drama, "That hurt me. I don't feel safe when people disappear, when things get hard. I need someone who can show up, not shut down," and then you walk. You don't wait for the perfect comeback. You don't leave the door half open. You reclaim your dignity, and then you disappear. You see, the avoidant isn't moved by tears. They're moved by the realization that their patterns cost them something valuable. When your silence speaks your self-respect louder than your words ever could, that's when they wake up. That's when the apology comes. Not because you begged for it, but because they finally felt the weight of your absence. Let your strengths say what their words never did. And if they come back with remorse, it's not because they changed overnight. It's because you finally did. Most people go into relationships believing that if someone hurts them and they simply explain their feelings in a calm, respectful way, the other person will acknowledge the hurt and apologize. And in healthy dynamics, that often happens. But when you're dealing with someone who leans avoidant, someone emotionally distant, conflict averse, or scared of intimacy, your usual approach backfires. You can speak from your heart cry, ask for honesty, even write long, vulnerable messages, and instead of getting closer, they just retreat further. You're left not only with the original hurt, but with the added pain of feeling dismissed or even punished for expressing your emotions. That's the thing about avoidance. They don't respond well to emotional confrontation, no matter how gently it's delivered. It's not about your tone or the timing. It's about how their nervous system processes intimacy and perceived threat. When you bring up something that makes you feel vulnerable, they feel unsafe. When you lean in, they pull away. They're wired to protect themselves, not to repair ruptures. So if your goal is to hear the words, "I'm sorry I hurt you," the worst strategy is to keep trying to talk them into understanding your pain. Because for avoidance, that conversation isn't an opening for closeness. It's a signal to shut down or escape. That doesn't make them evil or heartless. It means they're operating from a deep, seated survival pattern, usually formed in childhood. They learned at some point that closeness equals pressure or rejection. So when emotions escalate, even in a calm way, it triggers a retreat. They might ghost, they might go cold, they might become defensive. But the core of their behavior is the same: create distance to feel safe. And in doing so, they leave you feeling alone with your hurt. But here's the crucial insight. If you want an avoidant to take accountability, you have to stop pursuing them emotionally. They don't learn from your explanations. They learn from consequence, not punishment, consequence. There's a difference. Punishment is about control. I'll make you feel bad for hurting me. Consequence is about boundary. I'm not going to keep giving access to someone who makes me feel small. This is where most people get stuck. They think, if I just explain it the right way, they'll get it. They'll change. But with avoidance, logic and love don't override fear. What gets through to them isn't a perfectly worded message. It's the absence of your presence. It's the realization that you're no longer there waiting patiently for them to figure it out. That moment, when they finally notice the silence, the lack of updates, the calm void where your energy used to be, that's when something clicks. Because suddenly the dynamic they've relied on has shifted. You're not the constant anymore. You're not trying to fix them. You're not proving your worth through understanding. You're just gone. And for the first time, they're alone with their pattern, alone with the impact. And that's the space where responsibility is born. Not out of pressure, but out of loss. It's ironic, but when you stop asking for the apology, that's when it becomes possible. Because you're no longer trying to coax accountability, you're forcing them to confront their own absence. You're not explaining your value, you're demonstrating it by removing it. And that shift creates emotional contrast. It highlights how safe and easy it was when you were there holding the emotional weight for both of you. And now that you're gone, they're finally sitting in the discomfort that you carried alone for so long. It's not about making them suffer. It's about removing yourself from a place where you were not being met. And in doing so, creating a mirror that shows them what their avoidance actually costs. Because up until now, they've been able to disengage without consequence. They hurt you and you stayed. They pulled back and you reached out. They went silent and you filled the silence. There was no reason for them to change because the dynamic worked in their favor. But when you interrupt the pattern, when you show them that your love has limits, they feel it. Even if they don't admit it right away, even if they pretend not to notice, people notice when energy leaves the room. People notice when emotional safety disappears, especially when they've grown used to it. So if you've been chasing closure, if you've been desperate to make them understand how much they hurt you, shift your energy. Stop explaining. Start embodying. Pull back, not to manipulate, but to reclaim your center. Give them the one thing avoidants try hardest to avoid: space to reflect. Real reflection doesn't happen when someone is defending themselves. It happens when they sit alone, faced with the result of their actions. And if they care, if they truly have a conscience, they'll come back not just with words, but with remorse. Not always, and not always in the way you want. But when they do, it won't be because you chased it, it'll be because you stopped. Because you let the consequence of their own behavior be the teacher you could never be. When someone hurts you, especially someone you care deeply about, your instinct is often to bring it to them in a way that invites understanding. You might think, if I can just explain how this made me feel, they'll see it, they'll realize the impact they had, they'll care. And when you're dealing with a secure, emotionally present person, that approach often works. A sincere, open conversation can bring clarity, healing, and accountability. But when the person is emotionally avoidant, the effect is usually the opposite. They don't lean in, they lean out. They don't clarify, they retreat or defend. It leaves you feeling like your vulnerability somehow pushed them away, like you did something wrong simply by being honest. That's why clarity, not emotional chaos, is what actually creates the opportunity for accountability, especially with someone avoidant. Chaos doesn't necessarily mean yelling or drama. It can be emotional overload, pleading, rehashing the same point in 5 different ways, hoping one version will land. But avoidants don't hear you better when you get louder or more detailed. In fact, that often makes them shut down even more. They feel flooded. Your words become noise, even if they're coming from a genuine, heartfelt place. To make someone acknowledge how they've hurt you, especially someone avoidant, your communication has to be clean and concise. That doesn't mean cold or detached. It means grounded. Think of it like holding up a mirror, not throwing it at them. You're not trying to wound them back. You're trying to reflect a simple truth. This is what happened. This is how it made me feel. This is what I need now. That's it. No justifying your feelings. No begging them to understand. No dramatizing to provoke a reaction. Because the truth, spoken calmly and clearly, is powerful enough on its own. Avoidants often have an allergic reaction to intensity. Even if the situation calls for it, they can't handle the feeling of being emotionally cornered. When you express yourself with strong emotions, again, even valid ones, they might interpret it as pressure, threat, or expectation. They associate emotional weight with entrapment, not connection. So when they sense an oncoming tidal wave, their defense system kicks in: minimize, escape, rationalize. They become cold, distant, or even passive-aggressive, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to sit in discomfort without losing their sense of control. So what cuts through that resistance? Clarity. Calm, neutral truth, telling. When you speak from a place that isn't trying to get anything from them, not even an apology, they don't feel cornered. Instead of feeling like they're being put on trial, they're simply being presented with facts. You're saying, this happened, this didn't feel okay, I want something different for myself. And then you leave it there. You're not hovering, hoping for a reaction. You're not standing in the doorway of the conversation with a metaphorical clipboard, waiting for them to pass a test. You've said what needed to be said, and now you're walking away from the chaos of hoping and into the clarity of your own boundary. This doesn't mean being emotionless. It means channeling emotion through a steady frame. When you express hurt with composure, it's disarming in the best way. It makes them sit with the discomfort instead of escaping it. It invites reflection, not resistance, because there's nothing for them to push against. No blame, no manipulation, no guilt trip, just the truth. And that kind of truth lingers. It sticks in the mind longer than any emotional plea. You don't need to dissect their patterns, psychoanalyze their childhood, or craft the perfect sentence. You don't need a 10-point presentation on how their behavior triggered your attachment style. You need 1 or 2 clear statements that reveal what they did and how it felt. That's where the power is. Because clarity cuts through denial, it disrupts avoidance. It makes even the most defensive person pause. Maybe not in the moment, but eventually. And here's the paradox. The less you try to convince them to understand, the more likely they are to start seeing it for themselves. When you stop adding emotional weight to every word, your message becomes lighter, but more piercing. You don't look like someone seeking validation. You look like someone who already knows their worth. And that shift can be shocking for an avoidant who's used to others walking on eggshells or over-explaining in fear of abandonment. When you speak clearly and then let go, it shows them you're not afraid of their silence. You're not afraid to lose them if it means protecting your peace. That's when they start to reconsider. That's when accountability becomes possible, not because you demanded it, but because you made space for it to arise organically. People don't take responsibility when they feel blamed. They take responsibility when they feel the natural weight of their actions, unburdened by defensiveness. That weight is only felt in the quiet that comes after a clear truth, not a lecture, not a performance, just a line in the sand. One that says, here's what happened. I'm not okay with it. I'm not here to fight you. I'm just not staying in a situation where I have to beg for basic respect. That's how you create the conditions for an apology. Not by chasing one, not by turning your pain into a monologue, but by letting your words stand as quiet proof that you see the truth, you value yourself, and you're no longer available for confusion. There's a moment in every emotionally draining relationship where you feel the shift inside you. The moment you realize that explaining, convincing, and hoping hasn't worked, that no matter how many second chances you give, the other person keeps meeting your vulnerability with distance. It's subtle at first. Maybe it happens after yet another unanswered message, another excuse, another stretch of silence, followed by their sudden reappearance like nothing happened. You feel the tug in your gut telling you that your emotional labor is going nowhere. And in that moment, whether you realize it or not, you're faced with a decision. Keep fighting for something that only you are holding up, or walk away, not with bitterness, not with drama, but with dignity. The most powerful thing you can do in a relationship where your needs aren't being met, especially with someone emotionally avoidant, is to stop showing up in the same way. When you walk away, not as a threat, not as a manipulation tactic, but as an act of self-respect, you completely shift the dynamic, you change the game. Because up until now, you've likely been the one who bridges the gap. You reach out when things get tense. You initiate the hard conversations. You forgive quickly just to avoid emotional distance. You've probably been the emotional center of the relationship, even when it's painful. But the truth is, emotional avoidants don't often understand loss through conversation. They understand it through consequence. That's why the walk away holds more weight than any speech. It creates a vacuum they can't ignore. You're not throwing words at them anymore. You're not explaining your worth. You're removing access to it, and that silence is far louder than anything you could say. To the avoidant person, your consistent presence has become a comfort. Even if they didn't appreciate it, they've relied on the fact that you're there, even if they haven't said so. Your emotional availability has filled a void in their life, whether or not they acknowledged it. But the problem is, they never had to earn that access. They didn't feel the cost of their behavior because they never lost anything as a result of it. You stayed even when they pulled away. You waited even when they disappeared. And while your loyalty may come from love, to them, it reinforced the belief that they could stay emotionally detached and still have your heart within reach. That's why walking away, not in anger, but in calm finality, is the most unexpected and impactful move. Because it says, I love you, but I love myself more. It says, I'm not here to chase potential. I'm here to protect my peace. And that's a message even an avoidant can't misinterpret. Because there's nothing to argue with, no fight to win, No emotional storm to weather, just the stillness of your absence. And in that stillness, something starts to break through. Most avoidant people don't respond to emotional pleas because they've built their world around avoiding emotional discomfort. But when someone they relied on is no longer there, when the familiar support system disappears, they're left to sit with their own patterns. And for many, that's the first real wake-up call. It's no longer just a dynamic they can navigate. It becomes a reality they can't ignore. They begin to notice the messages that no longer come through, the care that is no longer offered, the space you used to fill that now feels hollow. And that's when, for the first time, they might realize what they've done. You don't walk away to punish them. You walk away because staying in a dynamic where you are undervalued chips away at your sense of self. And the more you stay, the harder it becomes to see clearly. Your walk away isn't a performance. It's a reset. You're not trying to make them miss you. You're choosing not to miss yourself anymore, because every time you compromise your needs to keep them close, you drift further from your own center. And eventually, something inside you says, enough. That moment is your turning point, not because you've given up, but because you've finally chosen you. You're no longer afraid of their silence because you've learned how to hold your own. You're no longer haunted by what they didn't say because you've said what needed to be said to yourself. You're not leaving because you want them to follow. You're leaving because you've realized you don't have to live in the emotional shadows of someone else's avoidance. When you do that, everything changes. The emotional economy shifts. You're no longer spending your time, energy, and self-worth on someone who can't reciprocate it. And for the avoidant, that's the moment they feel the absence. Not just of your physical presence, but of your emotional investment. That's when regret might surface. That's when reflection might begin. Because for once, they're left to sit in the consequence of losing something they thought they could take for granted. And even if they don't say it right away, even if they never say it, you've still won something far greater than an apology. You've reclaimed your peace. You've made it clear through action that your love is deep, but not unconditional when it comes at the cost of your self-worth. You've shown, without needing to raise your voice or explain your pain again, that your presence is a privilege. And that's a message no one forgets. There comes a point in every painful connection where words stop mattering. You've said everything. You've expressed how it hurt, why it hurt, and what you needed. You've done it calmly. You've done it with tears. You've done it through long texts and quiet moments. But somehow, nothing changes. They don't hear you. Or worse, they pretend to, only to repeat the same patterns again. When you're dealing with someone emotionally avoidant, the more you speak, the more they seem to disappear. You're not being met with understanding or remorse. You're met with distance, denial, or indifference. And the question begins to creep in: if words don't work, what will? This is where most people get caught in a cycle. They keep reaching, explaining, and hoping, not because they're weak, but because they believe that with just the right words, they'll break through the wall. But avoidants don't respond to emotional repetition. They've already tuned it out, not because they don't feel anything, but because they don't want to feel everything. Your words, no matter how real, make them feel vulnerable. And vulnerability is something they've spent a lifetime running from. It threatens their control, their sense of safety, their ability to emotionally detach when things get too intense. That's why your silence is more powerful than your words. When you stop talking, you stop giving them something to resist. You stop offering them a role to play. There's no longer a reaction to give, a defense to mount, a message to ignore. You leave behind a space that can't be filled with noise. And in that space, for the first time, they're left to feel something they've been avoiding all along: the weight of your absence. This kind of silence isn't cold or passive-aggressive. It isn't about punishment. It's about self-respect. When you go quiet, not out of spite, but from clarity, it sends a message no monologue ever could. It says, I'm done trying to be heard in a place where listening isn't happening. It says, my peace matters more than your comfort. And most importantly, it says, you don't get to have access to me without showing up in a real way. Avoidants are often the way they are because they've never truly had to confront the emotional impact of their actions. When they pull away and people chase them, when they go silent and others fill in the silence, they remain comfortable. They avoid the consequence of their detachment because someone else is always there holding the connection together. But when you stop talking, when you stop making effort, they begin to feel the emotional consequences in a way they never had to before. This isn't about playing games. It's not about teaching them a lesson with silence. It's about reclaiming your voice by choosing when and if it deserves to be used. Your energy, your affection, your willingness to talk things through, those are privileges. When you give those things to someone who repeatedly ignores them, you end up depleting yourself. You become a broken record of compassion, slowly fading into resentment. Silence is the point where you stop pouring and start preserving. There's something haunting about losing the sound of someone who once cared, the texts that don't come, the check-ins that stop. The energy that once felt constant suddenly pulled away. It's disorienting, especially for someone who assumed you'd always be there. And even if they don't show it, they feel it. They may not react immediately. They may even pretend it doesn't bother them. But over time, the silence echoes. It lingers in their mind longer than any argument or plea, because it's unfamiliar, it's final. It carries the gravity of something real being gone. This is how avoidants often come to terms with what they've done. Not by being told over and over again, but by being left alone with the reality of it. The silence forces them to sit with the truth in a way your words never could, because it's not something they can dodge. It's not a message they can skim. It's a feeling they can't escape. They begin to realize that your energy was stabilizing them in ways they never noticed until it disappeared. What's beautiful about this process is that it's not about changing them. It's about changing your own behavior in a way that protects you. It's about understanding that you don't need to be louder to be heard. You just need to stop handing your voice to someone who refuses to value it. And when you do that, you find peace, not because they apologize, but because you no longer depend on the apology to feel whole. Let them sit with the silence. Let them wonder. Let them finally experience the stillness that you once filled with love, patience, and words. Because in that quiet, they may finally realize what they've lost. Not because you explained it to them, but because they felt it in the emptiness where your presence used to be. There's a moment in every connection where the pain outweighs the hope, when you realize that continuing to give your best to someone who barely shows up for you is not strength, it's self-abandonment. And for those who love someone with avoidant tendencies, that moment often comes slowly. You excuse the distance. You explain away the inconsistency. You convince yourself that if you just love them the right way, if you're patient enough, understanding enough, strong enough, they'll eventually come around. You believe your love will make them feel safe enough to open up, to finally be the partner you know they could be. But time keeps passing and nothing changes. The more you show up, the more they disappear. The more you reach out, the more they shut down. And eventually, you realize that waiting for them to change while you remain exactly the same isn't a path to healing. It's a cycle that's quietly destroying your self-worth. That's where the shift begins. That's when you understand that being the change doesn't mean sacrificing more, giving more, or bending further. It means doing the opposite. It means pulling your energy back, rewriting your role in the dynamic, and letting your standards, not your feelings, lead the way. Avoidant individuals are often not malicious. They're self-protective. Their distance is a defense mechanism, not a punishment. But that doesn't mean you have to tolerate being emotionally neglected. That doesn't mean their fear of intimacy should dictate your experience of connection. The truth is, they won't change just because you want them to. They won't suddenly wake up and become emotionally available just because you've made it easy for them to stay comfortable. People change when they feel discomfort, when the cost of their behavior becomes real, not theoretical. And that's the mistake many people make. They try to teach the avoidant with kindness, with endless patience, with explanations and emotional availability. But what ends up happening is that the avoidant never has to face their own patterns because you've absorbed the impact of them. They ignore your emotional needs and you soften your expectations. They distance themselves and you get closer to make up for it. They hurt you, and you explain it away as something they didn't mean. And while all of this may feel like love, what it really does is protect them from ever having to see what their behavior truly causes. The only way that changes is when you stop accommodating, when you stop shrinking your needs to fit their comfort zone, when you stop waiting for them to become the person you keep seeing glimpses of but never consistently get. You don't get the apology, the accountability, the growth, until you start being the version of you that no longer settles for anything less. You don't even have to make a dramatic exit. Sometimes the most powerful change is quiet and steady. You start speaking up, you stop chasing, you stop justifying the silence, you stop assuming that your love is enough to do both people's emotional labor. That's when things begin to shift, not always immediately and not always in the direction you hope. But something starts to happen when you stop handing out unconditional access to someone who hasn't earned it. The avoidant starts to notice that the dynamic has changed. They're no longer being pursued. They're no longer being emotionally held up by your consistency. And if they care, even if they don't know how to say it, they feel that change. They feel the absence of your investment. That's when the possibility of growth finally appears. Sometimes it leads to real reflection. Sometimes it leads to a wake-up call. But whether it changes them or not, it changes you. You step out of the pattern of trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed and into the clarity of knowing you deserve more. You stop obsessing over why they're like this, and you start focusing on why you tolerated it for so long. That's not self-blame, it's self-inquiry. It's how you build the foundation that keeps you from repeating the same dynamic in the future. People don't evolve because someone told them to. They evolve when reality forces them to. When they see that their behavior has real consequences, not emotional discussions. When they realize that someone they thought would always be there no longer is. And not because they were pushed away, but because that person finally chose themselves. You teach people how to treat you not by telling them what you need, but by refusing to stay where those needs go unmet. You stop waiting for the apology and become the person who no longer tolerates being hurt without repair. That's how the dynamic changes. That's how the avoidant might finally be moved to take accountability. Not because you demanded it, but because they're now alone with the outcome of their own choices. You don't have to keep showing them what love looks like. You have to start showing yourself what self-respect looks like. When you do that, when you become the version of you who no longer bends to be chosen, the avoidant is left with a decision: grow or watch you walk away. And for the first time, that choice is no longer yours to carry. So here's what I want you to remember. You are not here to earn an apology. You are not here to beg someone to become emotionally available. You are here to honor what you know is true, that your love deserves to be met with presence, not distance, with care, not confusion. And yes, it hurts when someone won't take responsibility. It hurts when someone you opened your heart to runs the other way when things get real. But that pain isn't a sign to try harder. It's a signal that it's time to choose you. When you stop trying to fix them, when you walk away not with rage, but with quiet certainty, when your absence carries the weight your words no longer could, that's when they might finally see what they had. That's when the apology may come, not because you chased it, but because you no longer needed it to feel whole. You become the lesson they never expected and the love they may never forget. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having the courage to protect your peace. And if you're in the middle of this right now, if you're hurting, waiting, or wondering, let this be your reminder you don't need to do more to be enough. You just need to stop offering everything to someone giving you less than the bare minimum. Take care of your heart, stand in your worth, and trust that the right people won't run when things get real. Thank you.